solution with high osmolarity is going to have a lot of solutes. The solution with low osmolarity is going to have a few solutes. And the reason we care about this is because water always moves towards the area of high solute concentration.
No, it's not going to.
Carbon turns over 4.
It's just 1, so I do 10 times 1 is 10 milliosmoles. And now am I done?
No.
No, I have to take each one of these 3 numbers and add them up to get the total particle concentration of the solution. So I do 150 plus 10 plus 10, that should be 170. Oops, 170 milliosmoles.
What does the following symbol mean? You got it. There are many kinds of health hazard. Here is an image of the hazard symbol on the box. What does it mean? Well done. Well spotted. Food and drink are strictly prohibited in the lab. Imagine if somebody grabbed the wrong bottle by mistake and took a sip of the toxic substance. Clean up the lab protocol. Well done. Now put the neutralizer back on the shelf. Now it is safe to use an absorbent paper to clean up the spill.
Activation cascade can start, and then eventually you end up with these details.
Okay, we just have to know the basic process of it, that they activate the clotting pipes in the first place.
And the end result, the fibrin mesh.
Okay.
The reason why I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the activation cascade is because I think the steps that happen after hemostasis are almost more interesting than the process of forming the clot in the first place. The plasma
The main blood cells are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, take up oxygen in the lung. Click on the lab pad for more information.
Then you enter the fourth phase, which is called isovolumetric relaxation. The ventricles relax. And that is the first event of diastole, so early diastole. So the heart cycles, the cardiac cycle, the heart cycles between early diastole, mid to late diastole, systole, and then back to early diastole again. And there are events that happen at each all along the way. So let's take a look in greater detail of all the things that happen during each of those steps. So the first step, ventricular field, high pressure to the area of low pressure. So the AV valves get forced open by that high pressure and the ventricles start to fill up. It happens to both sides at the same time. 80% of that blood passively enters as soon as those AV valves open, but at the very end of diastole, the atria will contract, and that will force the last 20% of blood into the ventricles. So all of that is ventricular filling. First the 80% passive flow, and then the last 20% of that's forced in with atrial contraction. So all that's happening, the atria have contracted. Now it's time for the ventricles to contract. Iso means the same, and volumetric is referring to volume. So isovolumetric contraction is a short period of time when the volume in the ventricles doesn't change. And the reason the volume in the ventricles can't change is that all four valves are closed. So here's what happens. We were in ventricular
Professor, right, so during systole, or during this whole isovolumetric contraction, all the valves are closed.
All four valves are closed all the time. But the AV valves is get them to close. So what happens during isovolumetric contraction is the ventricles start to contract. As the ventricles start to contract, the blood gets pushed superiorly, and that fills those cusps of the valve, and that forces the AV valve to close. So the AV valves ventricles is unchanging briefly until those AV valves open. And so right now the ventricles are at their emptiest. And they're not 100% empty, right? There is some blood in there. And if you want to know how much blood left the ventricles, what you have to know on as well. So I wanted to introduce it to you now. All right. Questions so far?
And the end of systolic volume, is that before the AV valves close?
Before they open again. So in this picture, the AV valves are still closed. They have been closed started contracting, and they're not, and they haven't yet opened. All right, questions for me?
Not right now, but you will be getting like messages from me later on.
All right, so let me check this out. Okay, so we have 3 minutes to go over this graph. So this graph is a little bit tricky to look at first, but it can be very useful once you get the hang of what you're looking at. So the first thing to realize when you look at this graph is anytime you're looking at blue, that's diastole. And anytime you're looking at any shade of orange, that's systole. And so here we're in diastole again. The lines on the graph